Hello everyone. My name is Elise. Welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing so good today. We are here to do a little bit of a video essay on my channel, and that is all around why Romantasy is so popular. This has been a secret project that I've been working on for about a year now, and last year I endeavored to really deep dive on the genre, which I am a newbie to. I read through 7 books for this project last year, also a good amount of DNFs, in order to try and figure out and connect with what is drawing readers to the genre in the first place and what is keeping them picking up the books. So in this video, we're going to be talking about a couple different things. Firstly, we're going to discuss what Romantasy actually is. Now, there are a lot of conflicting definitions to what Romantasy is, so I'm just going to give you my best understanding, but no, there are other interpretations. We're going to talk about the rise that the genre has had in popularity, and I'm going to give you a few numbers and statistics to show that. We're also going to talk about some staples of the genre that I think impact why people want to pick it up. And then we're going to talk about some theories. I'm going to talk about a theory that is not my own, but I think is highly credible and maybe the most popular theory. And then we're going to talk about my own personal theory, which I think is a little bit more niche, maybe a little bit more unhinged, but I think it holds some water and it's interesting to think about. So that will be the thing that we talk about at the end of the video. Really, this project came about because 2 years ago, my mother-in-law, who gifts me lots of books that she reads, which is amazing, sent me my first ever Romantasy book. And I had so much fun reading it. And it started getting me thinking about what resonated not just with me, but with other readers. And I started asking other people in my real life why they like the genre. And it was really interesting to hear their responses. And even the fact that I could ask a lot of people in my real life what they liked about the genre because they were reading from the genre is something to note, because so many people that I know have at least read a few Romantasy books. So that's really what led me down this rabbit hole. So again, we're going to be talking about why Romantasy is so popular. And this video is less about the marketing of Romantasy and why that may have contributed to its popularity, i.e. the book talk of it all. But this video is more going to be about what do I think is resonating with the readers of this genre and keeping them picking up more books. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into what Romantasy actually is. When I think about Romantasy, I think about a scale or a range. On one end, there is paranormal fantasy, which I would consider mainly to be a romance plot and romance tropes with some fantasy elements thrown in, but it's dominated by romance. On the other end of the spectrum, I would say there's fantasy with a very minor subplot of a romance. With either of these ends of the spectrum, you could take out the subplot element and the book would still make sense, right? So in a paranormal romance, you could take out the paranormal element and the book would still make sense as a whole. With a fantasy book with a small romance subplot, you could take out the romance subplot and it would still make sense. Romantasy I see as the thing in the middle. So something that's around equal measure romance and fantasy. It doesn't need to be exactly equal, but any of this chunk in between, where if you took out either the romance or the fantasy, the book would no longer make sense. So they both need to be there in order for it to be a cohesive work. That's what I would consider Romantasy as. Again, other people have different definitions, so not everyone's going to agree with that. I think that's a decent way to conceptualize it in broad strokes, and is going to be my definition that I'm using for this video. While Romantasy has gotten this new label and this new marketing, it has really always been there as a genre, but I think it's been classified as a subgenre to fantasy as a whole. But the subgenre has now grown enough that it just gets its own category. So we know the genre has always existed, and you can see evidence of this. So for example, Romantasy or fantasy romance has particularly been popular in the YA space previously. So if you think about real breakout hits like the Twilight series, if you think about the Cassandra Clare series, those are huge YA releases that are romantasy. So it's kind of always been around, it's just had a new label. Additionally, self-publishing is a huge part of this genre, and I think there has always been a really rich self-publishing landscape for romantasy. And we're even seeing that now, where a lot of previously self-pubbed romantasies are getting a traditional publishing because there's now such a huge demand in the market for those types of books. So it's pulling from some of the pool that has always existed. To give you an idea on the true popularity shift of this genre, in 2024, 5 of the 10 best-selling novels of that year were romantasy. That is a huge amount for one genre to dominate. It has by far and away been the genre that has seen the most year-over-year growth compared to any other genres. From 2023 to 2024, there was a 47% increase in sales for this genre. That is massive, particularly when a lot of other genres in the market have stagnated in their growth. So if you want to know more specifics about the numbers for the genre's popularity, I will include a couple articles down below. One's from the New York Times and one is from The Guardian that include even more stats if you want that. So now that we've talked about what the genre is and just how popular it really is, let's talk a little bit about the staples of the genre, because I think these are important when we're discussing any theories behind why it's so popular. So the first thing I want to mention is the tropes. Any type of genre blend book allows for a unique mix of tropes that can often subvert traditional or tired tropes in just single genre literature. Here we have a blend of fantasy and we have a blend of romance, of which there are many tropes within those specific genres, but when you combine them together, it allows a really interesting mix that can create novelty for a reader, particularly if you're a reader who reads heavily in one type of genre. So for some examples, in the romance tropes, a lot of people get frustrated with a miscommunication trope. So essentially, the two main characters could really figure out all of their differences if they just had a single conversation with one another to address what's happening, but they don't. It's often frustrating for readers because it's hard to suspend your disbelief for something that is that fixable to be causing that many problems in someone's life. But in a genre blend, you might be able to have a miscommunication trope, but maybe it's because someone's under a curse and they can't actually speak about the thing that they need to speak about. That allows a suspension of disbelief because there's this fantastical element that we've sort of bought into the rules of that world going in. Another example might be like fake dating is really popular, but maybe it's hard for you to understand why someone would go through all the work of fake dating someone just to get their parents off their back or to keep face in front of an ex. But what if they were fake dating because someone had sworn a blood oath to protect someone and they needed a ruse to stay close to that person? So they tell everyone that they're dating. Again, subverts some of the tropes that we might see a lot of and allows us to engage with them in a new creative way, which I think people really like. This is a way that I think the genre really draws people in, is through the unique mix of tropes. Another important staple of the genre is that they're mostly female-led. And I do think this is important because the readers of romantasy are also mostly female. Now, everybody could read everything. There's always exceptions to the rule, but I do think it's dominated by female readers, and it makes sense that they're wanting representation for themselves of being the lead, especially when we look back to a couple decades ago and it was really dominated by male leads. So I think that shift is important for this genre as well. And lastly, this genre does also rely on the happily ever after. So not only are we getting the high stakes of a fantasy novel, we're also getting the comfort of a romance with knowing that at the end, we're going to end in a happy place. And that combination of high stakes, high fantasy, and happily ever after from romance is a real staple of the romantasy genre. So those are the three things that I think we need to consider when we're examining why this genre in particular is drawing people in and keeping people in. One of the main theories that has come out around why romantasy is so popular is that there is a real YA to adult pipeline going on here. And I think there's a lot of credibility to this. Again, if you want more details about this theory in particular, I will link some sources down below for you to read. A lot of people can see the correlations here. I think this parallels maturity levels. So as, young adult readers are maturing into adults themselves, the content is also maturing in the level of stakes and in the explicit content. You're also getting to follow characters that are continuing to be a similar age range as you or in a similar developmental stage as you. So all these readers of romantasy, when they were young adults, are wanting content to match their own development. With that, I think you also have to consider the nostalgia factor. So they read it when they were younger, they want to keep reading it now. Clearly, there were probably things that they enjoyed about it if they were reading it all those years ago. So I think this theory really makes sense that YA romantasy readers have now aged into wanting those books, but for adults. So here we have adult romantasy really thriving. And I would agree with this. I think we've seen this phenomenon happen in other artistic outlets as well. And it just generally feels a little bit like common sense. But my additional theory as to why romantasy is so popular is that I think romantasy is our most recent modern take on women entering the workforce. And that might sound a little bit crazy, but hopefully I'm going to convince you that it might be somewhat true. So firstly, to harken back to these stories being female-led, oftentimes the women are the heroes in romantasy. And also, they get to have a love story in addition to being the heroes of their own story. It really features this idea of women having it all. I can have a career and I can have a love life and a family. And even better, I get the promise of a happy ending. So if we think about all of the things that a modern woman might be juggling today, we're talking about investing in your community. We're talking about fighting against oppressive systems. We're talking about just straight up getting shit done, right? You need to run your life. You need to work. You want to fall in love. You might want to have kids. All of these things have become more accessible than they ever were before. And that accessibility is great. But I think that also comes with this tension of how do I prioritize which of those things that I really want? And I think, that can change in different seasons of your life, but everything can't be your number one priority. And this is reflected, I think, commonly in romantasy books, and something that I was really seeing as I was reading more of them in shorter succession, which is that we often see these female leads struggling with the push and pull, the pressures of trying to navigate community, family, political systems, all these types of things. And we have to see them make really hard choices and sacrifices in certain areas to prioritize other ones. And I think there's something to that representation of how hard it is to have it all, but particularly how hard it is as a woman to have it all and how complicated that is. The unique take that romantasy has on this type of fiction or literature in general, of which there is a lot of in other genres, is the optimism that you get with a happily ever after. So not only are we struggling with the women entering the workforce and trying to have it all, but again, we know that at the end of the day, things are going to work out and we are going to have pieces of it all, even if it's not perfect and even if everything didn't get to be our number one priority, right? They'll suffer losses along the way, they will make sacrifices along the way, but overall, things are going to end up pretty good. I think our previous wave of this, which is still ongoing as well, is like that female rage of it all, or like the Barbie monologue where it talks about how impossible it is to be a woman. This is another iteration of that, while pushing back against the pessimism maybe present in some of those things, which I think is useful, but a little twist that Romantasy gives us that we can grapple with the prioritization, with how challenging it is, and still know that we can do it. We can take action. So while this genre is highly entertaining, it's high stakes, it's nostalgic, it has this unique blend of tropes, and those are all important factors, I think, into why Romantasy is as popular as it is. But I also think equally interesting to think about is how this might be some modern representation for women who are trying to have it all, right? Who have entered into the workforce, who have more accessibility than ever, and who are wanting to fight to have it all, even if it is kind of fantasy. So hopefully you enjoyed this video and it gave you some food for thought about Romantasy as a genre, and giving the genre maybe a level of reverence that I don't feel it always gets, because there's something to be learned from every genre, from every art form. And I've had a great time doing a deep dive on a genre that is really out of my comfort zone and new to me and gave me interesting things to think about. So please let me know any of your thoughts on why Romantasy is so popular. I'm very curious to hear them. There is going to be a follow-up video to this where I review all of the books that I read for this project. So I read 7 books in total, but I had a number of DNFs, and boy, do I have thoughts about these books. Some good, some bad. So my next video will be doing a wrap up for all of those books. Check it out if you want to. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.